Zombie hunter Brian Patrick Miller found guilty in the Phoenix Canal murders. He was on trial in the deaths of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burtis along the Arizona Canal. A Maricopa County Superior Court judge found Brian Patrick Miller charged in connection with the Phoenix Canal Miller killings in 1992 and 1993, guilty on all 6 counts. Miller was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of sexual assault, and 1 count of attempted sexual assault. The counts related to the deaths of Angelo Brasso and Melanie Burtis along the Arizona Canal in Phoenix. As a bench trial, the judge who heard the case, Judge Suzanne Cohen, also served as a jury. Miller elected to have the judge decide the case rather than bringing in a jury to hear the case. It took 22 years for investigators to make an arrest in the deaths of Angela Brasso and Melanie Burtis. The victims' family members waited 7 years since then until the trial began in October 2022. The murders shocked and haunted the Phoenix area. The victims were riding their bikes when they were attacked and killed. Brasso, who was 22 years old, disappeared while taking a bike ride on a Sunday night in November 1992. The following morning, police discovered her naked and mutilated body near a bike trail at Cactus Road and Interstate 17. There were multiple injuries and the body was decapitated, said Phoenix Police Detective Leo Spedopoulos, who was at the scene that day. Police interviewed dozens of people who lived in or were in the area at the time of the murder. In addition, they looked into possible connections to decapitation murders in their parts of the country, but they could not identify a suspect. And then, 10 months later, 17-year-old Melanie Burtis failed to come home after riding her bike at night along the Arizona Canal. The following morning, police found her body. Burtis had also been killed similarly with the knife. Burtis was not decapitated, but her bicycle was missing. Police developed theories and followed leads. They looked at a surgeon from Europe. They thought the killer might be a special forces operative who visited the family, but they still had no witnesses and no suspect. What they did have was DNA. But at the time, the DNA from the crime scene did not match anyone who was or had been in the criminal justice system. It wasn't until 2015, 22 years later, that Phoenix police made an arrest. The DNA at the crime scene matched Miller's. He was known to many in Phoenix sci-fi and horror convention crowd as the zombie hunter. The key to arresting Brian Patrick Miller for the Phoenix Canal murders was his DNA and last name. That is according to the genetic genealogist credited with helping solve the case. Colleen Fitzpatrick was trained as a nuclear physicist, but 10 years ago she was toying with the idea of using DNA databases to solve cold cases. At that time, people were using the databases and companies that operated them to track down relatives and complete family trees. Adopted children were using the database to track down their genetic parents. It occurred to many of us why we can't use it to solve cold cases. Because a John Doe or Jane Doe or an unidentified assailant is the same as an adoptee. You don't know who they are. You don't know their parents, but you can use DNA to find out. She was attending a conference in Phoenix in 2014 when she approached the Phoenix Police Department with her idea. She offered to apply this technique to one of their cold cases. And then several weeks later, they sent me the Y DNA profile for the crime scene from the Phoenix Canal murders, said Fitzpatrick. Those murders took place in 1992 and 1993. They were brutal. The killer used a knife to murder and mutilate the victims, 22-year-old Angela Brasso and 17-year-old Melanie Bernis. And so we entered the numbers from the forensic file into our software, and I did the search. And that's when I came up with 6 matches to the name Miller. That meant 6 people with the last name Miller had submitted DNA samples to one of the commercially available DNA home test kits, and the Canal killer DNA matched them perfectly. It didn't mean that one of those people was the killer, but it meant that the killer was likely to be related to them and the Miller family. Why DNA is passed intact from father to son through genetics. When Phoenix police received the information, their detectives identified someone with the last name of Miller, who they had spoken to about the murders years before. They devised a plan to obtain the man's DNA, which turned out to be a match. Here's how Schwarzkopf described his plan to get Miller's DNA. Quote, I had noticed there was an Amazon office building, a warehouse north of where he parked, and he spent his time at his breaks. So I came up with an idea that I would recruit Mr. Miller as a security person. And I told him that we were out there doing security on the particular office complex warehouse, and that there had been some thefts from it. And I asked him if he ever seen anybody back there. And he'd said, yeah, there's been some vans in the and out of that place. So I told him we were trying to do it, trying to get the surveillance. But frankly, we didn't want to do it anymore. And if he'd be interested in working as a security guard, watching that particular warehouse from the back, end quote. That talk led to a meeting at the Chili's where Phoenix police had arranged for a table with sanitized silverware and glasses. Schwarzkopf met with Miller and his daughter. The 3 talked about Miller's zombie mobile and the security job. After the meal, detectives retrieved Miller's silverware and glass, and less than 2 weeks later, Miller was in custody and charged with the murders of Brasso and Bernis. On January 13, 2015, police arrested Brian Patrick Miller and charged him with the murders of Brasso and Bernis. It's amazing to me that after so many years, exactly one word cracked that case, and that word was Miller. Brian Patrick Miller is currently being held in the Arizona State Correctional Facility awaiting his sentence of death.